Okay, hello. Thank you for coming. This is really a special honor and great privilege. It's my first time to Portugal. I've been all over the world many times, but never to Portugal. And so it's time to correct that oversight. And it's great to be here. And I'm really proud to speak to you and to the Party for Animals. And I just came from Lisbon and spoke up there, and this is a really great thing, very progressive. And it's part of the revolution that's happening that we need to have happen. And so it's exciting to be part of these times, the revolutionary times, and the crisis that we're in today, because we're in very severe crisis. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is the revolutionary shifts in consciousness that have unfolded philosophically for the last few centuries, and the implications for this relating to human identity. So I'm going to talk about human identity tonight. Who are we? Who do we think we are? And the politics of human identity, of who gets to be called human and what this means, and why human identity is an error. That's why I've provocatively entitled my talk, Everything You Know About Human Identity or Human Nature is an Error, because we don't know yet still who we are. And I'm going to explore that paradox now. So I'll be speaking in English, and if I speak slowly, everything's okay, huh? Okay. You don't want to hear my Portuguese, or my Italian, or my French. If I ask you the question, who are you? You're to think about that in your mind. Who am I? You might say, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a brother, I'm a parent, I'm a Christian, I'm Muslim. You might say, I'm a worker, I'm a manager. You might say, I'm male, I'm female. You might say, I'm white, I'm black, I'm brown. You might say, I'm heterosexual, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, transsexual. You might say any number of things relating to your nationality, your ethnicity, your gender, your occupation, your profession. We tend to identify ourselves as many roles and think of ourselves in many different ways. But I bet that you wouldn't answer the question, who are you, by saying, I'm a human being, I'm a member of Homo sapiens, because we take that for granted. We don't think about the fact that we are an animal, a species that came out of an evolutionary flow of life that has existed on this planet for a very short period of time, very short. Maybe 100,000 or 200,000 years at the most. There's no consensus on the dates. We came out of Africa, we migrated throughout the world, and we have colonized this planet. We don't have the Brazilian empire, we don't have the Portuguese empire, the Spanish empire, we don't have the Brazilian, the American or English empire. We don't have the Egyptian, Roman, or Greek, or Ottoman empire. We have the human empire. One species has colonized this planet. And everything has been a mistake. The whole way we have thought about ourselves and the world has been an error. And this error, people still internalize, people are still educated into this illusion, this falsehood, this fallacy. And so this error is starting to be corrected. So what I want to speak about tonight is the genesis of this error, the dismantling of this error, and really how stubborn two hierarchical forms of consciousness I'm going to call anthropocentrism and speciesism are. This latter term, speciesism, of course, means that it's meant to be analogous to racism and sexism. It's meant to suggest that just as racism puts one race over another race, hierarchically, in a form of power relationships and says, this is the superior race, this is the inferior race. So speciesism does the same thing. There's one species, the human species, all other species are non-human species, non-human animals specifically, that we are superior to them. That means we have the right to use them for any purpose that we want. That means they have no moral value or very little moral value. We are not equal. See, there's a funny thing about human behavior is we don't tend to see differences and respect them for what they are. We always take differences and arrange them as a hierarchy, don't we? So in every way that we can relate to one another or to the earth or to other species, we arrange this hierarchically in every way. Ageism, ableism, you name it. So speciesism is the hierarchy of the human animal over all other animals. Really, it is a form of anthropocentrism, which means exactly what it says. That we are at the center of the earth, that the earth exists for our purposes. In other words, the earth and the animals are means to an end, to our end. Their purpose is to satisfy our purposes, and that's it. Aristotle was the first philosopher of slavery, the first philosopher of hierarchy. Actually, Western philosophy got off to a great start with Pythagoras. Pythagoras is today what we would call a vegan and an animal rights activist. He abstained from meat for ethical reasons, not just dietary reasons. He criticized hunting for ethical reasons. And then Aristotle comes along in the middle of Greek antiquity, and he says that lower forms of reason exist to serve the purposes of higher forms of reason. So just as plants exist for the sake of animals, so animals exist for the sake of people. That's how we started to think, and now that thinking is internalized deeply inside of us. And anybody who eats meat obviously has internalized that form of consciousness, because what is on your plate, you think, is a means to your end. Really, there's no justification for that. And that's why, if you're animal rights, you really have to be vegan to live without inconsistency, because otherwise you are living a life based upon exploitation, based upon speciesism and anthropocentrism. And these are the very ideologies that have been constructed throughout Western civilization. I can go much further back to civilization itself, which began 10,000 years ago, what we call agricultural society. That was when we began to domesticate the wild. And once we domesticated the wild through farming and through herding animals and trapping animals and exploiting them for food, clothing, labor, transportation, this way of life is only 10,000 years old. That's when hierarchy emerged in society. That's when slavery emerged in society. It's just when patriarchy emerged in society only 10,000 years ago. So much of this began just 10,000 years ago. And so as soon as we started reflecting, philosophizing upon the basis of our lives, domesticating nature, of course we would think like exploiters, because we already were exploiters. We have the exploiter mentality today still within us, and this needs to be extirpated. It is the last prejudice to go, the last form of ignorance to go. That can no longer be tolerated, because the destructive consequences of this error cannot be underestimated. Now, I say we came out of Africa 100, 200,000 years ago. We migrated throughout the planet. We began to speak. We began to form languages, symbolic cultures, only 45,000 years ago. Language is only 45,000 years old. And that's when you find the paintings in the French caves of Lascaux and elsewhere. Around this period in history, people started to symbolize their thoughts. Now, Nietzsche said something very profound. I'll be talking about the philosopher, 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, quite a bit tonight. Nietzsche said that as soon as humans began to think, they invented errors. because we think very crudely, right? Gods, the sun god, the moon god, pantheism, a plurality of gods, all kinds of superstitions, all kinds of forms of ignorance and errors, a lot of which would get corrected over time, but some of which stayed in our thinking. Some of which remains with us today. Errors, delusions, illusions, fallacies. And Nietzsche says that the errors that stick, the ones that don't get corrected, are the ones that have utility to life. In other words, we tell ourselves certain lies, like, for instance, if you will, God, not to impugn faith, but Nietzsche would use this example. We like to invent a God, a story of a soul, of an afterlife, because it suits our purposes. It flatters us. We are vain creatures, and we want to believe that this is all for us. We want to believe that there's some afterlife. We want to believe that this will go on forever. Right? And it's hard to not believe. We want to believe in the rainbow bridge, right? That after our animals die, we'll see them again. Death is not forever. It's only temporary. There are all kinds of things we still believe, and Nietzsche would say these are errors. And we keep them because they serve our purposes of flattering our egos, our vanity, and as existentialists would generally say, humans cannot accept the fact that we are just, as Heidegger would put it, thrown into the world. We just exist, and that's all we know. We exist. We don't know for what purpose, for what reason, or what really lies beyond the human mind except what we can imagine and what we can dream. And that's all we know. And if you're honest, Nietzsche extolled the virtue of intellectual honesty. If you're honest, you will admit that's all we can know, that we are just here. And that any meaning that exists in the world is humanly constructed. Okay? So let me begin with a paradox. The paradox is that after 45,000 years of thinking, of culture, of symbolic expression, of communication, of philosophizing, after 45,000 years, Homo sapiens, isn't that a nice name? Homo sapiens, wise man. So wise we're destroying the planet. So wise we can't get along with one another. We kill each other in wars. So wise that we're at war with everything on this planet. We're at war with the animals, with the earth, and with ourselves. So wise, Homo sapiens. For 45,000 years, Homo sapiens has been thinking about who we are, trying to define who we are, and never getting it right. We still don't know who we are. We come up with these fantastic, simplistic, childlike answers to simplify Aristotle. Rational man, or featherless biped. These don't help. And they're not true. As I'll show, they're not true. But we hold on to these illusions of who we are, what Homo sapiens is, because they flatter our vanity. They serve our purposes. They allow us to exploit the planet and feel like we're good people and that we have the right to be exploiters. This is a God-given right, according to religion. I would be so bold as to suggest that religion really cannot address this debate. Although there are revolutions happening in religion, there's the greening of religion. Animal rights is now an important part of Christianity. And of course it goes back to ancient Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, ancient Indian thought. It begins with biocentrism, or the idea that we all are connected together equally in life. But I think to answer this question, who are we? Who is a human? We have to look to philosophy and to science. Now, specifically science is what I'm going to be looking at tonight. What does science say? Because science is fact-based. So with no intent to offend any religious sensibilities, I'm going to suggest that this is a question that has to be answered scientifically. And really there's no other way to answer this question. Who are we? Who is Homo sapiens? Okay? Now, we begin with what I call the revolutions of modernity Well, we begin with this paradox, okay, that we don't know who we are yet, and these revolutions would correct this. And there's also, in addition to a paradox, an irony. Just as we're starting to learn who we are through these cognitive revolutions, we have become so sophisticated, we're changing who we are. There's a question on the table here. Do we have a nature? Is there such a thing as a human nature? Or are we entirely plastic? Are we malleable? Are we so flexible that we can be anything society shapes us into being, right? It's like a hunk of clay. Whatever society makes us, that's what we are. Or do we have a nature? Let me suggest that we do have a nature. We evolved 5 to 7 million years ago in eastern southern Africa as a branch of a primate tree, as a specific kind of primate. Jared Diamond, the contemporary anthropologist and author, calls us the third chimpanzee. The bonobo, the common chimpanzee that you're most familiar with, and humans. We actually belong in the primate family. We're closely related to the great apes, the 4 great apes, throwing orangutans. We are primates, okay? So if you answer the question, who am I, and you said a primate, you're starting to think along the right lines, right? But very few people would answer the question, who am I? I'm a primate. Try it. And see how many people say I'm a primate, or I'm the third chimpanzee, or I'm part of the great ape combined family, etc. So just as we're starting to learn something about human nature, and I suggest that we have a human nature because we have 5 to 7 million years of evolutionary baggage as animals. Just as we're starting to learn about this, we're changing this. Now, think about the animal within. We forget that we're animals, right? Have you had an urge for sexuality lately? Have you had a sexual? How many people have had a sexual? Never mind that question. How many people have had a sexual thought lately? Probably most of you, okay? That's the animal within. How many people have had a violent thought lately? I've had quite a few today. People are annoying me. That's the animal within. You see, that's like what Freud called the id. So anytime you forget you're an animal, all you have to do is feel the id, the instinct within us, the animal within us, and know that, hey, we really are not a rational being. We're an animal. Or try to shake an addiction, try to break up with your boyfriend, girlfriend, go through a divorce, right? You realize this is not the captain of the ship. We don't control our lives with rationality. We are animals, and our animality is what drives us to war, to aggression, to territorialism. And I'm not saying we can't change that, but we will never change that unless we recognize the fact that we are animals. We are xenophobic, we are territorial, we're very, very violent animals. So as we are beginning to learn who we are beginning to change who we are. So it's almost like we will never know who we are for 2 reasons. One, we're changing who we are, because even though we have this biological nature, there is to some degree a plasticity of the human self. Pharmacology, okay? People say they've written books about the impact of Prozac on the human mind. And some people say that these antidepressant drugs, they create a different personality. They create a different self. And so we have pharmacology, we have the therapeutic society, we have all kinds of mind-altering drugs that can create different experiences, different perceptions of reality, different natures, if you will. We are genetically modifying the world, and we are starting to genetically modify ourselves. We have already created hybrid species in petri dishes. You take the DNA of a human, you take the DNA of a calf, and combine it and create a hybrid species. This day will come, I guarantee you, if we live long enough, where we will be genetically modified. We will be genetically altered. This society will look like Gattaca, the film Gattaca. where the new form of discrimination that arises will be genetic discrimination. Oh, you're only normal? You're not genetically modified? Because this will be the privilege of the rich. So there's this paradox that we still don't know who we are. There's this irony that we're starting to change who we are as we're figuring out who we are. And there are the revolutions of modernity that I now want to talk about to show you how in the last 400 or 500 years our perceptions of ourselves as animals, as beings on this planet, have radically changed. Now, this is the medieval map of the world. This is medieval cosmology. It was a centered world, right? God created the world. In the middle of the universe was the earth. Of course, in the middle of the earth, or at the center of all life, the meaning of all life, the purpose of all life, man, literally man, because this is a patriarchal worldview too. And women were considered closer to animals or closer to nature than they were to men and to culture and to reason. And of course, at the center of man was reason, or our soul, our essence, rational essence, Homo sapiens, the rational man. This was the picture of the world in medieval times. This picture is destroyed. This picture is gone forever. This picture is a lie, an illusion, an error, a fallacy. And we start, you may know the progression of thought. You may be somewhat familiar with this outline. We start in the 16th century, in the 17th century with Copernicus and Galileo. And the two of them together were able to establish that it is not that the earth is at the geocentric worldview, that the earth is at the center of the universe. The sun is at the center of our solar system, we should say, and the earth orbits around it along with other planets. This doesn't seem like a huge conceptual revolution, but look, it means the church was wrong. It means that the best scientific knowledge available at the time was wrong. And there's a psychological impact here of not being at the center of the universe that people found very uncomfortable. So what I'm going to show you is that each time this chart got disturbed, each time we started to get to the truth of who we were as animals, we had to quickly patch things up, stitch and sew, mend the tear in the fabric, because we could not allow the truth to come through. T.S. Eliot, the English poet of the 20th century, said something very profound. Human beings cannot bear very much reality. We can't take the truth. We're not strong enough for the truth. We feed off of, we thrive on illusions and errors. Okay? So Copernicus and Galileo shifted the cosmological maps from a geocentric worldview to a heliocentric worldview, right? From Earth-centered to sun-centered. Well, we know now that there is no center of the universe, that the universe is just infinite space, that there may be wormholes, there may be parallel universes. The whole idea of a center of a universe is absurd. But again, back in the 16th and 17th centuries, this was a very earth-shaking idea. Now, how would we begin to repair the damage done by the Copernican Galilean revolutions? Well, that wasn't so hard, because some people said, okay, we're not at the center of the universe. That just means we have infinite space to command. That just means everything is subject to human control. And people were able to deal, except for the church, people were able to absorb, if you will, the blow, the hammer blow of the Copernican and Galilean revolution fairly easily. Now, something more challenging happened centuries later, the next revolution of modernity in science with Darwin, 1859. 1859, Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. He sat on this manuscript for a couple of decades. Do you know this story? This was sitting in his drawer. Only because a fellow thinker wrote him a letter. Dear Charles, I submit to you my work for your esteemed professional review. Would you please examine this and give me your considered opinion of my work? Well, Darwin began to look at this and he said, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been thinking. Exactly, it's the theory of natural selection. This guy, we're thinking parallel tracks. Now, to his credit, actually, he gave the theory of evolution co-credit to this man, whose name escapes me because I work from memory and I'm getting old. But, so Darwin sat on this. Why? Because the implications of this were so revolutionary that he was afraid to publish it. The Origin of Species was published in 1859. Now, what impact did this have? Well, it told us that we were not at the center of the earth. Okay? There is a picture called the Great Chain of Being. It's similar to this that you find. I mentioned Aristotle anticipated it. You have God, angels, man, animals, plants, rocks, and minerals. Okay, this is called the Great Chain of Being, and that there is an order of perfection in the universe, and that the higher you go, the more reason, the more rationality, the more perfection. Of course, God is perfect, and then angels, and right below angels is man or humankind, and below us lies animals. This is called the Great Chain of Being. This was a prevalent cosmology. It was part of this picture. It's another way of putting this picture in medieval times, all the way up through medieval times. What Darwin did was this. He said, look, there are primordial conditions of life, of evolution. Evolution does something called speciation. It creates species. What's the purpose of life? Just to create species, that's all. And it speciates, okay? So instead of this picture, of ascendant rationality, where we're just one step below angels and God, Darwin gave us this picture, okay? If you will, a wheel or a tree or a bush, the spokes of life. That here we are, Homo sapiens, one of millions of other species. So think of the cognitive implications of these two metaphors. This is very flattering. This is not. Okay? We don't know how many species are on this planet right now, so there are many species we've never yet even discovered. Let's keep it that way. There might be up to 10 million species on the planet. We are just one. And yet we think that, all of this exists for our purposes. So Darwin showed us that we are one among millions of other species. We are not created by God. We are created by the same natural processes, natural selection, all other animals are shaped by. We are animals. He emphasized that. And he said that we are different from animals in degree and not kind. And that's really important. We are different from animals in degree and not kind. He anticipated the last revolution I'm going to discuss, cognitive ethology, in his book, The Descent of Man, and some of his books that he wrote after Origin of Species, some of his most important work for my purposes. So he said that everything that we have from animals. Our emotions, our pleasures, our joys, our capacity for sadness, our capacity to think, this all comes from animals. Because we are an animal, and in time we evolved an advanced forebrain. Very little was known about evolution at the time. People weren't even sure we came out of Africa. People were still saying that the so-called Negro race was a subhuman race. They weren't even humans. And we had barely begun to even see gorillas or great apes for the first time. This is how primitive our knowledge was at this time. So we're different in degree, not kind. That means that we are animals, and all we have we're a little more rational. We might have some different feelings or experiences from other animals, but different in degree and not kind. That means we belong to one family, and we're not separate from nature. We're not apart from nature. We're a part of nature. And that was very important for Darwin to establish. And so that meant that we are not at the center of the earth. There's no center to this picture. Now, How would this be repaired? Remember I told you that every time there's a tear in the fabric of human supremacism, we have to fix it. Oops, there's a tear in the cosmological picture. Get up there and fix that. How do you fix Darwin? Well, it wasn't so difficult. Number one, you just ignore what he said about being different in degree rather than kind. Number two, you use the biological sciences to advance the project of vivisection. By the way, Darwin supported vivisection. He was not anti-vivisection. And he maybe didn't have a coherent ethical picture. But you focus on the biological sciences as a science and use that for vivisection. Now, Darwin emphasized cooperation in the natural world. We think of Darwin, we think of competition. Natural selection is the competition, the survival of the fittest. He never even used that phrase. It came from Herbert Spencer, survival of the fittest, okay? Darwin emphasized the importance of cooperation, that all species that survive learn how to cooperate with each other. It wasn't just about competition. So how do you take the tear in the cosmological fabric and fix it so that we are once again masters of the universe after Darwin? Well, you turn Darwinism into social Darwinism. You turn Darwinism into the ideology of capitalism par excellence. Huh? Because you take this idea of competition, you forget cooperation, you say that we are competitive animals, we clawed our way up to the top of the evolutionary ladder, that therefore we belong here. The idea of might is right started to appear, and I'll return to that concept, might is right. And you emphasize the importance of competition in society, okay? I mean, look, this is nature, where competition does play a role in natural selection and governing life. This is society. Does competition play a role here? Well, it does in capitalism, doesn't it? Because capitalist society is based upon so-called competition. Well, Marx put that myth to rest by saying there's no competition in this society. This society is based upon monopoly control, price fixing, domination of markets. The very thing that society tries to eradicate is competition. But you see, the capitalist ideology privileged this idea of competition as an ideology to favor giant corporations, to ignore or obscure the fact of monopoly control, and because it meant that those people who were rich and who were at the top of the social ladder were almost there by natural design, almost selected to be elites, right? In other words, class society was naturalized. That's how you fix the tear in the fabric after Darwin. You turn Darwin into a capitalist ideologue. So it turns out that man is not at the center of the earth, but we rework Darwinism into a capitalist ideology, into a speciesist ideology, and we fix the tear in the fabric. Now, Nietzsche and Freud come along in the 19th and 20th century. Freud wrote The Interpretation of Dreams. That was published in 1900. Nietzsche died in 1989 and lived for another 11 years, almost in a coma. One of the greatest minds ever, just burnt out. But what Nietzsche and Freud did was to say that reason is not at the center of man. Really, this was implied by Darwin, so they made this explicit. We think of ourselves as rational beings, as I've said, that we have an essence, and this essence is to be rational. Well, they emphasized with Darwin, although they didn't refer to Darwin often, Nietzsche certainly didn't, that we are animals governed by instincts, governed by the will, governed by impulses that are not rational, that are sub-rational, right? The way that this often is portrayed is, for instance, the iceberg metaphor. You know, we say, here's reason, but instead of being all of the self, it's just a part of the self. And everything here, the unconscious, the sub-rational forces are much stronger in life. And that's what really shapes us. That's what controls us. And so Nietzsche and Freud said that man is not the center of the earth, reason is not at the center of mankind, humankind. We are animals, we are not governed by rationality. Nietzsche said in response to Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Nietzsche said, no, it thinks, therefore I am. It, the unconscious, the id thinks, therefore I am. That rationality is just like the byproduct of subrational forces in our life. It's not the captain of the ship. It is just a sailor, just a crew member. That's all. It's not in control whatsoever. So how do you repair the fabric, the tear in the fabric after this? This seems really damaging, right? Really damaging to. What are we talking about here? Remember, the human identity, the picture of human beings that we have built over thousands of years of Western thought. How do you repair this? Because now we're into the 20th century, and it's now established that we are full-fledged animals, and that Aristotle was wrong, the medieval church was wrong, Catholic theology and science were both wrong. We are not rational beings. How do you repair that? Well, you turn Nietzsche into a Nazi. His idea of the will to power, that we are animals, we have an urge to power, to control, to dominate, or to overcome ourselves, our limitations, is partly what he meant by the will to power. The will to overcome yourself, your own limitations, through will, sheer will. Well, you turn the will to power into a social force. And you turn Nietzsche, who was an anti-Semite, into a Semitic, into a philosopher that was prejudiced against Jews. Right? And his sister helped the Nazis edit his writings to make him appear to be a Nazi and to appear to be a German nationalist, when he explicitly wrote that the most slow, dull culture that exists in Western modernity in Western Europe was German culture. He hated the Germans. He hated German philosophers, most of all. So you rewrite Nietzsche and make him into a Nazi. Now, Freud was very interesting because Freud was conflicted about rationality. He said that we are not rational animals, but we can gain control over our bodies, over ourselves. We can become free through psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is a science. It's a new kind of science. So Freud elevated science to the top position in society. He said that although we are not free, we are dominated by our will, by our unconscious, by forces that we don't understand and we can't control. Through psychoanalysis, we can understand them. We can gain control of them rationally. And Freud also helped to create the therapeutic society, which normalized people into adjusting to fit social patterns of behavior, expected social patterns of behavior. Okay? So all of these revolutions were incredibly radical. They just destroyed this whole picture. But being the kind of animals that we are, being very vain, not being able to withstand very much truth or very much reality at all, we took every revolution of modernity and we altered it so it wasn't so destabilizing, so we could still play masters of the universe. We could still play God on earth. Now, other things happened after the Second World War, the 1940s, 1950s, artificial intelligence and computers, right? And I'll just quickly go over this. We started to create machines that were more intelligent than us in many ways. We now have, you see these old World War II movies with these banks of computers that would fill this room, that now a laptop is more powerful than these computers. And computers can think faster than us, they can think more efficiently than us. They are what we might call our mind children. We created computers, but there is an anxiety in human culture that these computers will come back to control us, to create us. And so there's this anxiety of the domination of machines. And it's represented in science fiction. So think, for instance, of the film 2001. Hal, the computer, disobeys the engineers on the spaceship, and Hal refuses orders. Think of the Terminator. These machines are coming from from another planet to destroy humanity. They're machines, they're robots. They ultimately were designed by human beings. Think of the Matrix, where we are being attacked by machines. This shows an anxiety that we created these things that are more intelligent than us, that could escape our control, Frankenstein-like, and could destroy us. So what do? We have to domesticate that threat, right? Because it only plays out in science fiction. So 2001, the sequel was 2010. Hal's Rebellion was really just a badly written computer program. That's all. The machine didn't really rebel. Terminator 2, you take Arnold Schwarzenegger, this menace, and he becomes like a household pet. He's fully domesticated in Terminator 2. So much for that threat. The Matrix, of course, we win. We finally destroy the machines in the Matrix. Was I the only person in the room rooting for the machines? Did you see the film 2012 when humans are about to be destroyed by a tidal wave? Was I the only one rooting for the tidal wave? I think I was, because I'm tired of these phony endings. You know, the anxiety is fully on display in science fiction movies. We are being overwhelmed by forces we created, or we are finally getting what we deserve on this planet. Yeah, go tidal waves, go robots, go machines, you know? Yeah, but you know, I'm rooting for the wrong team. And of course, Hollywood is not going to send us home unhappy, so we always win, right? So, aliens is another thing that we worry about that threatens our supremacy, and this is all played out in science fiction. I'm going to pass over this, although I've written about this extensively, the threat of aliens and how that poses a challenge to the idea of human supremacy. And I'm going to move to the final revolution, which is animal rights and cognitive ethology. Now, we can't play games anymore. Science there's something unique about science. Science has been part of the ideologies of the world that has lied to us. The religion lied to us about who we were and who we are. Philosophers lied to us about who we were and who we are. Science has lied to us about who we were and who we are. But the thing about science is it is a self-correcting enterprise. If you allow science to do its thing, apart from the corrupting influences of money, maybe, it will start to tell you the truth eventually. Well, beginning in the 1970s and 1980s, a guy named Donald Griffin was one of the first writers, and he was working straight out of Darwin at first, and he invented a new science called cognitive ethology. Cognitive ethology is a scientific study of the complexity of animal behavior, of animal social life, animal emotions, and animal intelligence. Cognitive ethology tells us that animals are not simple machines like Descartes told us, that animals are machines, and they're simple in their functions. And there are mere functions for us. Cognitive ethology tells us that every experience we have, animals have, that they're lonely, that they feel grief, they feel sorrow, they feel joy. It tells us that their social life is based upon a complex system of rules. A chimpanzee society is not governed by instinct, it's a rule-governed society. There are rules to make and rules to break, and you follow the rules, or the alpha male comes down and restores some order in society until there's a new alpha male. Right? This is a rule-governed society, and animals know what the rules are. There are expectations to follow them, just like in our society. And cognitive ethology showed us all kinds of interesting experiments, the only experiments I would ever support. For instance, of the intelligence of animals. To give you just a couple quick examples. All right, so you put two chimpanzees in a field, and you hang a banana from a wire, right? It's too high for them to reach. And you put around 2 or 3 boxes. Let's see what happens. Okay, turn on the tape. Go chimpanzees. And chimpanzees, looking at this banana. Damn, I wish I had that banana. I'm really hungry. And hey, wait a minute. There's some boxes over here. What if we stack these boxes on top of each other? We can reach up and get that. Good idea, Henry. Let's do that. And they figure this out, and they climb on top of the boxes and get the banana. Or it's another example. You can see this on tape. Is a crow kind of an inverse example. Crows on a wire, food is hanging down. How can the crow get that food? That crow wants that food. So the crow starts to think. It turns out birds are very intelligent beings. They have incredible spatial memories and mapping senses. Well, they take a piece of the rope, they grab it with their foot, they take another piece and hold it like that, and they're pulling it up like this. They are solving problems. They're solving a problem. That means they're using their mind. That means they're thinking in logical ways. Now, if there's any doubt about this, and I'm telling this very simplistically, you give chimpanzees a language that we can share in common. Do you know what that is? It's called American Sign Language, right? And if you give them sign language, a common language that they can learn, they can tell you, I'm lonely. They can tell you, I'm hungry. They can tell you, that's a bad man. That's a bad man. And maybe because one of their trainers was abusive toward them. They start to tell you stories. Suddenly, behind these furry eyes and these furry brows comes another mind alive that speaks to us because now we have a common language, a sign language. Or a lexigram is a computer with symbols, and they can punch symbols and they can create sentences and tell us complex thoughts through a lexigram, through a symbol-making machine. Okay? So we have learned that animals can speak, that they can reason, that they can think very much like us. And we only can wonder what whales think, what dolphins think, because they have these incredible brains. The whale brains certainly are bigger than ours. Dolphins have signature whistles like names. Whales sing these songs. We're still trying to figure out what they mean. We know they have meaning. There's some symbolic meaning to those. There are certain prairie dogs you find in Colorado that they analyzed in detail, and they found that they have a word for every predator or sound and a sound for human. It's not a nice word. It's, bad, bad animal. Be careful. So what I'm trying to say is, with science now begins to study animal intelligence in a serious way, and what we found out was astonishing. What we found out was that we are the dumb animals, because in our arrogance, in our discrimination, in our prejudicial mindset, we refuse to consider what was obvious to anyone with a cat or dog, that these animals have feelings, that they are like us, that we are like them, that they have thoughts and emotions, that they are complex beings, not simple machines. And you can look at Donald Griffin, who founded this work. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Mark Bekoff, who was a contemporary and very prolific cognitive ethologist. So this revolution is happening in science. Science is beginning to correct the mistakes that science itself contributed to in our culture, because science always told us that we were rational beings and animals were simple machines, that we could do anything we wanted to. Now there is almost an emerging consensus. Cognitive ethology is not even controversial anymore. And increasing growing numbers of the scientific community now accept the findings of cognitive ethology. What does this mean? Scientists are giving up speciesism. So now that there's an emerging consensus in science that animals do have complex social lives, complex thoughts, and complex emotions, that they are like us, we're different in degree and not kind, now we're waiting for scientists to draw the correct conclusions from their theories. Because, for instance, the great apes, this absolutely means we cannot experiment on great apes. They are so identical to us. It was only with the Human Genome Project in the 1990s, as that was concluded, that we realized that we are 98.6, the numbers vary, but around 98.6 degrees genetically similar to chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are closer to us genetically than they are to orangutans. So we are cousins, and we don't experiment on cousins. They're biological cousins. And if we don't experiment on great apes, then we shouldn't experiment on cats, we shouldn't experiment on dogs, shouldn't experiment on mice. Vivisection is just a dead ideology. It's a dead science. It's a bad science. It's a pseudoscience. So now we start to draw the implications of what the philosophers and the scientists have been trying to tell us. We erase this fallacy, this worldview that has governed our thinking for so long, that put us at the top of a hierarchy, because we realize that we have no place on the top of this hierarchy. We have never had the intelligence and compassion needed to govern this planet. So now what we need to recognize is that we are a part of this planet, not apart from it, that we live in a great community, far greater than the human community. You often hear this cliche, we belong to one race, the human race. We belong to one community, the bio-community. Gaia, in the Greek word, which means earth, we belong to the earth, and we belong to it as a member of a community. And if you are a member of a community, that means you live in that community with respect. You respect other members of the community as your equal. If you have rights, you have responsibilities and duties toward other beings in that community, and we need to start exercising those. Because we have not lived on this planet very well, Homo sapiens. We have lived on this planet as destructive, predatory animals, as the most dangerous animal on the planet, as one species that has colonized the planet for its own purposes, and look at what we have wrought. Look at the results of 10,000 years of civilization. It is a disaster. It is a smoldering, smoking disaster scene from a science fiction movie, what we have done to this planet. So I say we either learn how to live responsibly and live right on this planet, or we don't live on it at all. We have no right to even live if we can't live in harmony with other forms of life. And so we need all kinds of revolutions. We needed to go through this revolutionary process to overcome anthropocentrism and overcome speciesism. We needed to completely destroy and dismantle this cosmological map, which was a total fallacy, and to create a decentered worldview. And we need social revolutions, right? We need not only cognitive, moral revolutions, we need institutional revolutions. We live in an economy, capitalist economy, that quite frankly is grow or die. It's a growth-addicted economy. We keep growing in population numbers and in our levels of consumption and in the amount of animals that we kill and that we eat. We keep growing and growing and growing. This is unsustainable. And so again, the earth is telling us right now, the earth is saying to us in its own language, you are living way out of harmony with what is needed to live on this planet. And environmental ethics it tells us, that how do you live on the planet? Well, look at how other beings live on the planet. Look at how the planet works and live in harmony with that. If we would just take the eco-wisdom that have been a part of the cultures of indigenous peoples, that the animals can tell us something about, that the forests can tell us something about, if we would just take that wisdom, this ancient wisdom, instead of thinking that our modern knowledges are superior, although ironically these new sciences are, it's like we're closing the circle. We're starting to learn what we always knew. We need to live in harmony with the rest of the planet. And that is what science is telling us today. And so a part of that is animal rights, absolutely. That means that all beings have equal rights because they have interests similar to ours, equal to ours. The interests a cat or a dog or a mouse or a chimpanzee has in not feeling pain is exactly identical to your interest. They want to be free from pain and torture. They want to be free to live their lives naturally in peace and harmony with their families, with their communities, in their natural settings, with their natural instincts and their natural drives and their natural life processes, just like we do. So animal rights is a hugely important part of this revolution. Environmental ethics also is a part of this revolution, and veganism is also a part of this revolution, because veganism is taking these ideologies and putting it into practice in our lives. When we are vegan for ethical reasons, We are showing other people that we don't believe that an animal is a resource for us to consume. And that just because it tastes good is not a rationale for killing. Any more than hunting is fun. What do hunters say? Well, it's fun. It's entertainment. I enjoy it. Same excuse people use to eat animals. These excuses, they don't work anymore. So we have to align our own being. We have to bring harmony to our ethics and our practices and align ourselves on this planet. And we have all these revolutions that are unfolding right now, and it's almost too late. Almost too late, right? But better late than never. But it's almost too late because the damage we have done to this planet is near irreparable. We now have 7 billion people that live on this planet. We are consuming annually 50 to 60 billion land animals. 7 billion people consuming 50 billion land animals. If you add sea animals, whales, dolphins, tuna fish, etc., we're talking scores of billions more. We're way up in over 100 billion, 150 billion. These are the amount of animals that 7 billion people are eating. It's unsustainable. We're destroying the rainforest. We're turning the oceans into ash. The number one contributor to climate change is agribusiness, agriculture. The number one source of pollution of the ocean, destruction of the ocean, is meat consumption. One of the major reasons why the rainforests are being destroyed, besides paper use, is for grazing ground for cattle. So we live in an unsustainable culture. Capitalism does not help because everything for capitalism is just a resource to be exploited. And unless these markets keep expanding, this whole empire will come down. And that's what's going to happen. This empire is coming down. The industrial order is falling apart. And things are just getting worse. Frankly, things are just getting worse. By the year 2050, there will be 10 to 15 billion people on this planet. Think of the problems now with 7. Okay, go up to 2050, 10 to 15 billion. You know that we're going to be eating more meat. Meat consumption will double by 2050. And we have to look at what's happening in the developing world. If you've ever heard the phrase that the planet cannot afford another United States, because the United States is 1/5 of the world's population. We consume 25% of its resources. China is 1.3 billion people. China's middle class is 300 million people. The size of the United States is 300 million people. So we have 2 United States on the planet, and we know we can't afford one. Now we have 2. India is rapidly growing, rapidly turning into a carnivorous society. Indonesia is set to increase its meat consumption 10-fold in the next 5 years. So we got a problem here. We got a problem. And like I say, we need institutional changes, but we need to hear the wisdom, the collective wisdom of ancient cultures and modern cultures, of tribal peoples, of contemporary science, and we need to radically revolutionize every facet of our being on this planet, or there will be no planet left for us to live on. Thank you very much.